Hakadosh Boker Tov, Masechet Chagigah Daf Zayin Amud Aleph. The Chagigah is over today. Yeah. So he says like this. He says, and then we're going to do the Hadran. So we were just talking about the Shulchan. And if you remember, we were asking about that the Shulchan should become receiving Tum'ah because it is Sipui Zahav. And if it's Sipui Zahav, right, it's covered with gold, it should receive Tum'ah. So the Gemara answered, and this is where we finished off yesterday, where it said, Shane Shulchan, the Shulchan is different than everything else. Why? The Rahmana Kari Etz, because the Torah called the Shulchan Etz. That means even though it was covered gold, it called it wood. Where was it written about that it's Etz? It says in the Pasuk in Yecheskel, Mem Aleph, right? This is Perek Mem Aleph, Pasuk of Bet. HaMizbeach. What does it mean, HaMizbeach? It says, HaMizbeach is Etz, right? It's made out of wood. Shalosh amot gavoa, 3 amot height, orko 2 amot. The length is going to be 2 amot. Umikseotav lo veorko v'krotav etz, and everything is etz, right? By the better lies there shulchan shilifnei Hashem, and this is what HaKadosh Baruch Hu says. This is a shulchan before Hashem. So therefore, from here that it keeps on saying that the shulchan is etz, albeit that it's covered gold. So therefore, what do we say? It's etz, and therefore that's why he says it's a special din in the shulchan. So ask the Gemara, patach b'mizbeach v'siyem b'shulchan. What's going on, right? Why is it that it's starting with hamizbeach? Look at the pasuk. Dichtiv hamizbeach etz, and then it continues, and then it says, "By the belai zeh shulchan." I don't understand. Is it a mizbeach or is it a shulchan? You have to decide, right? I don't understand. Is it a mizbeach or is it a shulchan? The pasuk started with a mizbeach is etz, and then it says zeh shulchan shelifnei Hashem. I don't understand. Is it a mizbeach or is it etz? So he says, "Patam mizbeach v'siyem shulchan." So Rabbi Yochanan and Shakish Shem Tavai, Rabbi Yochanan and Shakish, they both said, "Bizman shebet hamikdash kayam, hamizbeach mechaper al ha'adam." Meaning like this: during the time when the Bet Hamikdash was here, so then we had the real mizbeach, and therefore the real mizbeach, that was our atonement. So therefore, when we used to come and bring the korbanot on the mizbeach, so therefore we had the atonement on the mizbeach. You brought the korban, and therefore you're going to have your kapara. So he says, Achshav, but now that the Bet HaMikdash is destroyed, we don't have korbanot. So therefore what happens? Shulchano shel adam mechaper alav. The fact that a person has a shulchan, that is the kapara. So now what is our kapara? So here it actually says, like Rashi says, when we come and we give food to our guests or to the aniyim or to the poor people, that is our atonement. That becomes our mizbeach. Just like the mizbeach we were giving to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, certain korbanot we used to actually eat, certain other ones it was completely consumed to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So to here, when we come and we give to the poor people, what happens is, or to the guests, that we're inviting guests to our house on Shabbat, all of a sudden this becomes our shulchan. The shulchan is the mizbeach, because that's now representing the mizbeach. Remember anyway that the entire concept of everything that happened in the Mishkan was actually a replica of what happened into our houses. Our houses represent that. So our shulchan is the same as what we're trying to say over here. It's going to be the mizbeach, right? The bedroom is the kodesh kodashim, right? And continue, right, on and on. This is the concept that we are tomel mizbeach. There's a lot of other things as well, besides the fact of what also John Paul just mentioned, the entire halacha of throwing the bread on the table. If you remember, Shulchan Aruch says not to throw the bread on the table, but the minhag amongst Faradim, amongst Ashkenazim, was to throw the bread on the table. So Rabbi Friend actually came and he told us this, and afterwards I found that it was Sketchuvot in the name of the Khatam Sofer, right? So basically he says that the reason why it's a dugma of the Kohen Gadol, that he used to come and he used to throw the emurim on the mizbeach. The Kohen Gadol used to come and throw the limbs on the mizbeach for it to be consumed. So he says, so therefore, since the shulchan is our mizbeach, so now you, the balabait, when you're taking the bread and you're throwing it, you are like the Kohen Gadol, that you are throwing the emurim on the mizbeach. We're not talking about playing football, right? But we're talking about that there was a minhag to actually to throw it, right?
Just here, you're not throwing all the way to
No, but they used to have a minhag to start throwing.
Right, this is the it's going to Hashem, you know.
So the Khatam Sofer actually brings down that there was a minhag to throw the bread on the table, and just like the Kohen Gadol used to throw the emurim on the mizbeach, so too our table is the same thing. Another halacha is the salt. Why should we always have salt on the table? Because al kol korban echad takriv melach, on every single korban you have to bring salt. And the korban, again, the shulchan is parallel. Sorry, not opposite. It's parallel to the mizbeach. So therefore, just like on the mizbeach, you have to have salt for the korbanot. So too on our tables, we have to have salt as well. And again, this is all the comparison between the atonement that we're going to have for the shulchan. So our shulchan is mamash mizbeach. So imagine you're coming up to your table, you're sitting down on Shabbat, and whatever you're talking about, you're on the mizbeach. The mamash, that's where you are, right? You're on the mizbeach. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yochanan veResh Lakish de'amli tavayu. Rabbi Yochanan and Resh Lakish, they both came and they both said, Bizman shebet hamikdash kayam, mizbeach mechaper al adam, achshav, right? Shulchano shel adam mechaper al adam. Nowadays it's going to be the shulchan, and therefore that's why the pasuk started with the mizbeach and it finished with the shulchan, because nowadays zeh shulchan asher lifnei Adonai, and that's the pasuk we say right before the zimun to actually illustrate us this importance that our table is mamash nowadays the mizbeach. Says the Mishnah, right? This is the two dots on the page. The two dots said, Kol al-kelim shebamikdash yesh lem shniim. We said that all the kelim in the Bet HaMikdash, they had a replica, which is basically a reserve, a second one, or even a third one. It says here, shniim or shlishim, right? Except for what we said over there, but there was going to be the mizbeach, sorry, not the mizbeach, the shulchan, and some people say the menorah. Do you remember there was one shita, also the menorah? So it says the Gemara, how do we know though that the mizbechot did not have a problem? Why do we say the mizbechot did not have a problem? Because since they were connected to the ground, so therefore there was no problem. So it says mizbach hanechoshet, right? The mizbeach hanechoshet, which is considered like the ground, tichtiv, as it says in the pasuk, mizbach adama tasen. So the mizbach hanechoshet, which is the copper one. Where's the copper one? On the outside, right? On the outside in the azara, you got a copper mizbeach. What were the names of the copper mizbeach? Mizbach hanechoshet. No, mizbach hazav is the inner one. It's the inner one.
Inside?
No, the outer one. What is the outer one called? Right? Mizbach. What are the names of the mizbechot?
No.
Mizbach hanechoshet, mizbeach hachitzon, mizbach haolah. Right? This is the outer one. Okay. Now the inner one. What are the names of the inner one? Mizbach hazahav, mizbeach hapnimi, mizbach haketoret. Right? You had a few of them, right? So there's a few names. Each one had separate names, right? Because those were the different names for the reasoning, obviously. Chitzon is outside, Pnimi is inside. The inner one was made out of gold. So Mizbach Zav, the outer one was made out of copper. So Mizbach HaNechoshet. The Korban Olah, there was no Olah brought in the inner one. It was a Ketoret. So that's why the inner one was called Mizbach HaKetoret. The outer one was called, right, the Mizbach HaOlah. So each one has its own name. So here it says, Mizbach HaNechoshet. How do we know it's considered like ground? Because since it says in the Torah, Mizbach Adama Ta'aseli, this is the end of Yitro. So since it's Mizbach Adama, you have to make a Mizbach Adama for me, and that's called Mizbach Nechoshet, so it's like the ground. Mizbach Adama. Mizbach Hazahav, Tichtiv is it's written HaMenorah ve'Mizbechot, the two Mizbechot. So Yitzkush Mizbechot zelazeh. So there's a kesh, juxtaposition. Since we're bringing both Mizbechot together, so therefore, just like the Mizbach Nechoshet, Mizbech HaChitzon is what is considered Mechubal HaKarka, therefore it's like Karka, so it's not Mekabel Tumah. So too, the same thing is going to be the Mizbeach HaPnimi. And therefore, the Mizbechot, they never had to do anything with the Mizbechot. Right? It was only all the other Kelim. Chachamim say, what does this mean now that they're going to be Mitzupim? Right? So it says over here like this. The Gemara is going to actually explain the Chachamim, they hold like Rabbi Yezer, that the Mizbechot are not Mekablim Tumah, but rather they argue on the reason. Meaning, even they both agree that it's not Mekabel Tumah. The question is, what's the reason? So says the Gemara, Adraba, Kevin the Mitzupininu Mutameh. From the fact that it's going to be Mitzupeh, which means, right, if the Mizbechot were Mitzupim, bevadai lo yu nitmaim. Right? Why? Because then it's Kli Etz, which is Asuim Lenachat, which is not Mekabel Tumah. Only because of the Tzipui, that's why it's Mekabel Tumah. So says the Gemara, you're right. Ema v'chachamim metamein et ha-Mizbechot, only because they're Mitzupim. Which means the fact that they're mitzupin zahav, that's why, which means the Chachamim do not doresh the pasuk of Mizbach Adama. It means they argue on the fact that the Torah is calling it Adama, which means that they're not considering it Mechubar LeKarka. And therefore, for them, the fact that it's going to be mitzupeh zahav, that's a reason to be mitameh. So that's what they're doing. They're mitameh the mizbechot because it's mitzupeh zahav. The Baitema, or if you want, you could answer another answer. He comes and he says, Rabbanan le Rabbi Eliezer kamre. Rabbanan are speaking to Rabbi Eliezer. And they said like this, my datech, what's the svara that you learned the mizbach adama that they're not mekabel tuma, right? He says, you for sure hold that they should have been mekabel tuma. Why? Mishum de mitzupim, because they're mitzupim, and therefore they're going to be batel, right, to the tzipui, and therefore it's like a kli matechet. So therefore, miftal batil tzipuya gebayu. So why don't we just say that the tzipui is going to be batel to them, because it's called mizbeach etz. So for if it's called mizbeach etz, I'm not going to say that the mizbeach is batel to the tzipui should be batel to the mizbeach. So therefore, that's what he's trying to say. But that's in shitat av. The chachamim are arguing on Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, fine. Now we're going to go back and we're going to explain two different memrot which have to do with the tzipui of the mizbach hazahav. This is talking about the covering of the coating of the golden mizbeach. Amar Rabbi Avu, Amar Rabbi Elazar. Says Rabbi Avu in the name of Rabbi Elazar. Tamidei chachamim en ur shel geinam sholet bahem. Tamidei chachamim, the fire of geinam is not going to affect them. Okay, so the fire of geinam does not affect them. Why? Kal vachomer from the salamandra. It's a kal vachomer from the salamander. What exactly? Just like salamander is a toldot eshi, it's a tolada of esh, right? Asach midama en ur sheletebo. And if you're going to come, you're going to put from its blood onto yourself, the fire will not have an effect on you. So this is like fireproof. What is fireproof? You come, you put yourself the blood of the salamander, and it's not going to come and it's not going to affect you. So Tamidei Chachamim shekol gufan esh. Tamidei Chachamim, that their entire body is considered esh, because basically once they're osek b'Torah, it changes their entire body into a being of fire, right? You have to understand, what do you think? It's always hot in here. Right? You have to be esh, right? Sometimes people are very, very cold. So what happens is that a person has to come and their entire body becomes a chefza of esh. They become a piece of fire, right? So therefore, what happens is that they don't get affected, right, from the fire. The kavachomer is that just like the salamander is a toladat esh. Toladat esh means it comes from fire. So therefore, if you're going to come and you're going to here it says it's like a exactly it comes from like witchcraft, right, in order to make it. So that comes from the concept of fire. Okay, so he comes and he says like this. He says, if this salamander which comes from the fire, if you take from the blood of it, it makes you that you do not get affected by it, right? You get a protection. So too the Tamidei Chachamim, that their body is like fire, so for they're protected from fire. Just like the salamander, which is a tolada vesh, is protected from the ash, which means that if you now take its blood, right, you're going to be protected from the fire. If you take the blood of the salamander and you smear yourself with the blood of the salamander, that's what you just said. So therefore, you don't get burnt. That's what you just said. So therefore, so too, that they themselves, their body is esh, because they're learning the Torah, and therefore they become, their body is esh. So too, they're not going to become, right, how do you call it? They're not going to be burnt from the fire. The Chtiv says in a pasuk, "Halo chol devari ka'esh num Hashem," that my words are like an esh. So alacha kama v'chama, so the more so, right, the fire is not going to be sholet on the Tamidei Chachamim. That's the first memra to do with, right, what we're talking about of any type of a tzipui. So Amar Resh Lakish says, right, Resh Lakish, en ur shel geinam sholetet b'poshei Yisrael. Right, he comes down and he says something interesting also. The ur is not going to be sholet in the poshei Yisrael. Right, what does this mean exactly? So here it says it doesn't mean that the fire of geinam is not going to touch them, but rather it's not going to affect them that much because they're going to go up quickly. Right, what does that mean? So he says over here like this. He says it's kal vachomer from the mizbeach hazahav. What's the kal vachomer from the mizbeach hazahav? Just like mizbeach hazahav, she'en alav ela ka'oved dinar zahav. What's the thickness of the zahav there? The thickness of the zahav is only a dinar zahav, and still we bring the ketoret onto it. Okay, that's what he's saying over here. The tzipui is the ovi of a dinar zahav. Okay, so he comes and he says, right, which means that it's like it's nothing. It's shlisha etzba. It's a third of a finger, right? A third of a finger, which is nothing. So he comes and he says, and that's why it's still called the mizbach hazav. Dinar, right? Much. It's a coating. It's a thin coating. So he says, and still you're going to come and you're going to bring the ketoret on it. Kama shanim, right? Ve'ena ur sholetet bo. Right, and look how many years you're bringing the ketoret and everything, and still it doesn't change the gold. The gold still stays intact. even though it's so thin, and you've got year after year that they bring the ketoret, and it doesn't melt it, doesn't do anything to it. No effect on it. So Poshei Yisrael, Shemeliin mitzvot kerimon. So imagine these Poshei Yisrael, that even the Poshei Yisrael are filled with mitzvot, right? With like a pomegranate, right? Dichtiv, as it says in a pasuk. So obviously, we understand what's going to happen. Is that Hashem.